Welcome to another episode of Uncovered with Jarrod, Kimber, and Bharat and Jarrod. We're going to start by talking about Pakistan, and I'm assuming that you're just brimming with Pakistan stories to tell us, other than the very obvious one, which is, in fact, the first two stories we'll probably talk about today will be Pakistan and South Africa. I think it's very fair to say at this point that all analysis you can do on these two sides is absolutely pointless because it just goes to, well, it just goes completely the way it always goes. Where in one
Yes.
case is chaos and the other way is, endless sorrow.
Just look where we were this time last week. South Africa were favorites. I was going on every show and saying South Africa finally going to win a World Cup. And you and I spent 20 minutes talking about how shite Pakistan is and they had everything going their way, but they've blown it away. They're probably their best chance to do something in a
Mm.
World Cup. And that's what we were saying exactly a week ago. I was right here. You were right there. It is much cloudier outside in Adelaide. It's much sunnier here. But then what happens in cricket World Cups or men's World Cups anyway? Pakistan just come back from the brink and suddenly are now red hot favorites, in my opinion anyway. And so
Did Pakistan come back from the brink, or did the brink come to Pakistan? Because realistically, they played well against Bangladesh, don't get me wrong, but I'm not sure they did anything specifically other than, I don't know, offer prayers and good wishes to their Netherlands brethren.
But they did come out in their numbers, at least by Adelaide Oval standards, on a Sunday
Yep.
morning and wave the Pakistani flag a lot, including a Canadian flag, which, I guess I don't know what the Canadian Dutch relations are like, but it seemed to work. It was funny. There was one Dutch flag, apart from the ones I'm sure they were in the dugout. One Dutch flag brought by, I'm guessing, Jim Congdon, who I think you know from South Australia.
He's the guy that collects all the shirts, isn't
He
he?
does. Yeah, that's the guy. He
Yeah.
collector of all jerseys. I don't know what his Dutch connections are, but he always supports the Dutch, Netherlands. So he's got a lot of Netherlands jerseys. But it wasn't him. So there was somebody else with the Dutch flag. But there were at least, I would like to believe, 30 Pakistani flags already by, like, let's say the 11th over of South Africa's innings, and they were being waved frantically, and there were a lot of "Jeetega by Jeetega, Netherlands Jeetega" chants, which kind of, you've been enough or often enough to the subcontinent to know what that means. It's
But
basically saying, like,
where's the Netherlands in the bad chant? Did that strike up at any stage?
unfortunately, no. I mean, Mel Farrell, my Australia on 99.94 colleague, uh, claims that she heard Dil Dil Netherlands. I didn't hear it. I was on comms. Or I did hear the Jeetega by Jeetega, Netherlands Jeetega, which was kind of funny. But yeah, there were no Dutch supporters. There were just Pakistani supporters and Bangladeshi supporters as well. Don't forget, there were
It,
quite a few
of course,
Bangladeshi
yeah.
flags.
It was the weird thing is that this is a throwaway game for the ICC. It was the only game in the entire tournament, as far as I'm aware, that was
Yeah.
put in that stupid time zone. They clearly thought it wasn't ever going to matter or play anything, and it's ended. So I'm in the UK, obviously, and I looked at it, and there were 3 games, and I went, okay, it's a midnight game, but I'll probably watch a little bit of that, and then I'll get up and I'll skip the game in the middle and go to the other one at the later game. So I set my alarm and I get up and I'm watching it. I'm like, oh shit, this is going to be a good game. I'm going to have to sit through this. This is ridiculous. And then by the end, of course, I was just like, this is the greatest game ever. I can't believe I get to watch this. But yeah, it was, the ICC just threw that game away, and it's ended up being the game that we're going to talk about. I mean, other than India Pakistan, it's probably the game of the tournament, isn't it, from
Oh,
a narrative perspective? I know Pakistan, Zimbabwe was great, Namibia, Sri Lanka, we've had and Ireland, England, some good
yeah.
upsets, but the fact this was an upset that was great for the Netherlands, but also completely threw South Africa out of the tournament, so it's like a double whammy game.
I think it's the biggest upset we've seen in T20 World Cup history because of the impact it had. I mean, we've
Yeah.
seen Netherlands beat England in the past. We've seen other results of that fashion. I mean, like you said, in this very tournament, Zimbabwe almost knocked Pakistan out. Ireland almost knocked England out. but in a crunch game. And it's a fascinating World Cup. We've said this many times already on this show. Also because I don't remember any other T20 World Cup or any other men's World Cup, to be honest, where every team had to win their last game to qualify for the semi-finals.
Mm.
Generally, you'll have at least one team who just run roughshod over everyone else and they're already through. But here, even South Africa going into that game, even though it felt like inevitable that they would just coast home, you had to mention it on commentary. Like, and I was doing comms, and I've never been as excited as I was during this game. And you know me very well, Jared. I can't sit down when I'm doing commentary, so I was up on my feet anyway. I was jumping up and down with every South African wicket, not because I have anything against them. They were my favorites to go all the way, but just because of how well the Dutch were playing, how cleverly they played this game. And I'm sure we'll break it down further later. They just did everything right, from how they went about their power play, then how they built the middle overs, how they used the field and hit a lot of twos, how they attacked a very frustrated Kagiso Rabada. They really smashed him all around and then set themselves up beautifully. Colin Ackerman, who at one point, I must admit, on commentary, I said, oh, after maybe he's faced 10 balls, said, could we see a strategic retired out here? He's struggling so much. He's not had a great tournament. And then, well, he becomes player of the match. He starts smashing it all around. They just played it perfectly. And I remember saying this during the innings break. If anything, the bowling's been their strength. Batting's almost a bonus. The
Mm.
fact that they made 158 against the South African attack, they were just spectacular with the ball. They just gave nothing away. And even the few boundaries that South Africa did hit, they didn't seem convincing. Like at one point, everything that South Africa did was unconvincing. And
Mm.
yeah, and I must say this as well. From the beginning, they stood for the national anthem. And Lungi Ngidi was like, as always, as firm as ever in attention singing the national anthem, gets disturbed by the flies. And it became a continuing trend. I'm not even kidding. The flies went nowhere near the Dutch, or I didn't see a single Netherlands player being disturbed by the flies, but at least four or five of the South Africans, while batting, while fielding, seemed so annoyed by the flies. It just, and the flies in Adelaide at this time of the year, those fat flies that don't go
Yeah,
away.
big guys. Yeah.
Yeah, and if it just everything just was bothering them. They were not a happy
Well,
team. They were not happy campers, and yeah, eventually they're gone.
so the day before, or 2 days before, someone from Pakistan Twitter had contacted me and said, what's the chance? And I was like, so I thought about it for a little bit, and I said 10%, and everyone was like, oh my god, that's so high. And I went, yeah, but I think Netherlands bowling has been so good. And I
Mm.
said, all they really need to do is get 135 or 140, and they can put South Africa under pressure. And it had to be that way. They had to bat first.
Yeah,
They had to make slightly more runs than South Africa was capable of. But I don't think until this game, it's because Netherlands they hadn't even beaten the teams they should have beaten, let alone,
mm.
um, been good all the way through. But I don't think other people realized how good that bowling unit had been. Like Van Meekeren, I think he might have retweeted my tweet where I called him God tier. But
Mm.
I mean, he's been next level. Baz the leader. I can't think of any associate bowler who's had an impact outside of maybe the Afghanistani guys who've already played
Mm.
franchise cricket. I can't think of another associate bowler outside of Josh Davey in 2015 who's just been able to pick up so many wickets in a World Cup the way that Baz the leader has. And then you've got Glover and Van Beek and Klaassen, and then the what would you call them? The batting slash bowling spinning options as well. Like it's
Yeah,
a very, very good attack, considering everything. And I've been talking this attack up for years. This felt like this first time that everything came together. And do you know what I mean? Like you can look at it on
yeah,
paper and you're
yeah,
like, this is good. And then
yeah,
you watch them in the game and it's like, oh, it hasn't worked again, right? And part of the thing was they changed their batting. So they finally gave up on the two young kids opening and batting first
yeah,
drop, partly because Baz the leader almost died when he got hit in the face was it Harris
yeah,
Ruff or whoever it was who got him in the other game. Um, and I think just by again, so we're talking about Stefan Myberg. It says 38. I mean, let's be honest. He looked about 48 at times in this tournament.
he did.
We've both seen him play for like over a decade. He like at one stage I was like, is that Stefan Myberg's father? Have they got confused? Have they sent the wrong guy out there? But again, having him and Max O'Dowd, they put pressure on South Africa. Then that middle order finally turns up. But that's the Netherlands that I think looked like they were building towards a couple of years ago, and we never quite got that team. And it was incredible to see it all come together. But it was certainly it, I don't think it was as big an upset when you look at the matchups and the fact that Netherlands batted
Mm.
first as probably everyone else in the world will. But then again, you and I are looking at this a little bit closer than the average nerds.
Oh yeah, and I got slammed on social media for saying that it wasn't an upset or didn't feel like an upset anyway. Because an upset is because of the comprehensive nature of the win. They was
Mm,
outplayed not just by a small margin but by a massive margin, like the South Africans on every front by with bat, with ball. Yes, and Myberg did drop a catch, which I thought would really hurt them because David Miller had just walked out to bat. But then Rulof van der Merwe made up for it by one of the catches of the tournament. And I remember bumping into Dale Steyn and Sean Pollock later. And I said this on commentary as well. As soon as it went up, you could see like a stocky figure kind of trying to get under it, but completely not getting into, or he didn't look like he was going to get into position. Then I saw who it was. Once it was Van der Merwe, you knew he was going to take it. And that's exactly what Dale Steyn said as well. He's like, man, I looked up and I saw who it was. I was like, oh, it was Roloff. That's it. It's all over South Africa. And that's what
yeah.
happened. Like, I think the only catch that was better than that, I think we'll talk about it later on the show, like towards the end. But we did see another extraordinary catch during that match, which didn't happen on the field. But they did everything right. They South Africa were poor in the field. Like I said earlier, Kagiso Rabada was just frustrated with the whole world. At one point, Lungi Ngidi misfields a ball at deep fine leg, and as KG is walking back to his mark, he just lets out a big F bomb like next to the stump mic. And we were on radio, so Jeff Lemon and I had to like talk about ducks and ducks crossing for a while just to make up for it. It was they were just ill about like just being there and being, and look at the team they picked as well, right? You spoke about matchups, but I don't think South Africa were focused on matchups at all. They just felt, okay, we'll pick four fast bowlers, we'll try to bully the Dutch, win the toss, elect to field. Don't forget they won the toss, so it was
Mm,
Bahuma's decision to field first, maybe blow them away, and easy game. uh, from literally from the first over when my or the second over when Myberg attacked Kagiso Rabada, hit him for 3 fours, the Netherlands were on top. I don't think at any point after that point South Africa ever looked comfortable. And
mm.
complete credit to them. And you're right. We've seen this with the Irish. We've seen this with the Dutch now. They're just seasoned players who play a lot of cricket with each other, who just become better. I mean, the only comparison I can think of going back in time, Jared, is when Kenya were doing really well in 50 over
What I was
cricket.
thinking, yeah.
Yeah, there was a brief 18-month period, I wouldn't say more than that, where they seemed to have everything sorted. They would have the Suji brothers with the new ball, at least Martin Suji with the new ball. They would find someone to partner him. Thomas Odoyo was always there. He was there forever. Tikolo and Udumbe were solid. Ravindu Shah at the top of the order. And some good spinners, whether it was Asif Karim or Mohammad Sheikh or those guys, they just looked, oh, I'm just giving away my cricket nuffiness here, but like that, just looked like a team that had played a lot of cricket with each other. And I think it goes back to what Ryan Campbell's also tried to build, right? If you want to play for Netherlands, you can't just like rock up with a passport and play. You have to play club cricket. You have to become a part of the system. And when you become a part of the system, you become a part of the fabric of the team, and it's a different kind of gelling. And that's what we've seen with the Dutch. Of course, the Irish, the circumstances are different. They don't go around finding players to play for them. There's a proper system there. But again, with
A
them,
little
because these
bit.
guys have played so much together, it's just like, yeah, it's great signs for world cricket, if you ask me.
So the Kenya one's really interesting because I spent a lot of time talking to Asif Karim over the years, and he tells me that it's really that period from, I think it's from like '96. I can't remember when the
Mm,
ICC knockout tournament was, but a lot of players from other teams liked touring there, and so did the chairman and the chairman's wives, because you could go to Kenya. It was a nice time to be in Kenya, politically or whatever that may have been,
mm.
from a climate perspective. This is what they told me. I don't know anything about Kenya from that perspective. But you could go out and you could do all the safari stuff, right? So a little bit like what we're seeing with South Africa at times, with
Mm,
in a similar sort of way. And if you look in that area, Kenya did play a lot of really good cricket against really good teams. If you have a look at Ireland and the Netherlands, last summer. That's exactly what's happened to them. Now, we hope that it keeps happening to Ireland.
Yeah.
We know it probably won't with the Netherlands, with the Super League being cancelled. But there is a big difference when you're actually playing those kinds of players and you're in that kind of game. And for this team specifically, for this Dutch team, there's been a real disconnect between the guy, some of the players who did play in that weren't actually available in that home
Mm.
summer, but they're the players who are more used to playing professional cricket anyway. So, people in that sort of level. So there's almost a really nice blend between they got a lot of experience into younger players. They got players to have elevated roles. Even their role players are, Baz Delita probably wouldn't have developed as quickly had he not had what was it
Mm.
13 games against major teams last year. Like they wouldn't have batted him at first drop. I don't think they would have made him their fifth bowling option either, but they saw a lot of him. And not everything they did worked, of course. And in some ways it's a really them finishing against South Africa the way they did. It'd be really interesting to talk to Ryan Campbell of, is he happy
Mm.
with the way that they ended up? But the fact that them and Ireland both made the second round and then were quite good. I'm wondering if there is a link between those things. Anyway, we'll have a break. And then after the break, we'll talk about Pakistan and South Africa, because that's what we're going to talk about before the break. And then that never happened.
You're listening to Cricket's Conversation on 99.94. Whatever your team, we have the show for you on podcast, YouTube, or on the 99.94 app. We have India, England, South Africa, West Indies, and now Sri Lanka covered. If you want to find us, the best way is to follow us on social media at 9994DM by downloading the 9994 app or Google 99.94 on podcast. We speak cricket.
All right, let's talk about Pakistan and South Africa. You see, I don't know if you saw the video I did on Pakistan. So they won 5 straight games in the previous World Cup. Then they lost 3 straight games between the 2 World Cups. All 3 of those games they were massively in front of, and then they win 2 straight games. And when you put that together, people don't want to hear that narrative. I mean, we could bring this up with Australia. Michael Clark talking about Australia playing un-Australian cricket. Mate, they played shit cricket. Sometimes, if your top 3 and your best 3 seamers in this particular tournament aren't doing well, you're not going to have a good tournament considering the conditions and everything we've seen. So there's a lot of nonsense with that. And I think the same with Pakistan. People started doing that. But, you look through that side and we know the top order hasn't quite turned up. But I would say the middle order has probably played better than they thought it would have. And the bowling unit has completely held up. Should have won them the game against Zimbabwe. Should have probably won them the game against India as well. So when you do look at all that, people hate it when you talk about randomness in T20 cricket, but they were massively in front in 3 games. You wouldn't really expect to lose all 3 of those games from the positions that they had gotten themselves into. So it does feel, from me, from a T20 perspective, like there's almost a sense of justice in the fact that Pakistan has got, or Bangladesh almost got through too, but that Pakistan has ended up getting through because it is, these tournaments aren't really designed for the best team to get through. And it does frustrate me at times as someone who loves covering them, that isn't the case. But it feels like there's a little bit of justice to at least give Pakistan the chance to go into the semi-finals again.
Oh, very much so. Like you said, they should have won against India. If you actually look at this, they should have gone through the semifinals like they did or gone through to the semifinals like they did last year, having won all their games. Because after the Zimbabwe defeat, they have rallied. They beat Netherlands. They beat South Africa when nobody gave them a chance, especially not when they were 4 for 30 odd. And against a very plucky Bangladesh side, they got over the line. I think they everything clicked for them. But it's classic Pakistan as well, right? It generally takes a start like that to see Pakistan somehow find a way to, when people are not looking at Pakistan in a World Cup, is when they suddenly rise, which is what made their performance last year so surprising, when they literally coasted into the semifinals as favorites, and they found an Australian team. And I think I can draw comparisons between Pakistan this time and Australia last time because of one reason. Everything Australia tried last year, and that kind of explains the Australian early exit this time as well. Everything they tried worked out, right? Mitchell Marsh at number 3 was tried a few months before that. He was the only positive, or one of the few positives
It
from the
wasn't just that
tours
it
to
worked
Bangladesh.
out. the Mitchell Marsh thing and Ashton Agar thing, if you think about it. Mitchell Marsh
Yeah.
played, they then dropped him, they then brought him back and it worked. And they had the
Yes.
Agar thing where they changed they went from having 4 bowlers to 5 bowlers midway through the
Yes.
tournament. Then they stopped that. So even when they made mistakes,
Yes.
it still worked, which I think that is a really, really interesting thing, because Pakistan have, other than Muhammad Harris, who's obviously been a revelation, and Muhammad Wasim a little bit, but I think they were going to rotate through their seamers.
Yeah.
And they probably needed an extra seamer anyway, right? Like,
Yes,
it's that
absolutely they
tournament.
did.
So he just
Yeah.
happened to be the next cap off the rank. But it is a similar sort of thing of like, I still think the batting order is slightly wrong. I think if Muhammad Harris is going to be, bat the way he is, he should be opening, right? And then you should
Yeah.
have one of the other guys at first drop. So, you have that situation. But you're right. It is been a little bit random and everything else. And then you suddenly look up and you're like I've just done a bunch of research for the finals, and they just look. I know Bubba and Rizwan may not make any runs, and that might cause them all the problems in one of the 2 knockout games, which is fair. But you do look at the team and it's like,
Yeah.
it looks really good, and you had South Africa as favorites last time we spoke. And I think I had them ranked second on my power rankings, right? But there's a big part of me that was like, the more research you do on South Africa, the more you think the minute they lose 3 wickets, that it just feels like real panic stations. And then you look at Pakistan and you're like, if they lost 3 wickets, probably one of Baba, Rizwan, or Shadab, or Shan Masood is at the crease, right? Or 2 of them even perhaps. And you're thinking to yourself, well, there's still someone there, right? Like, there's still something there. And the whole thing is kind of interesting when you look at it from that perspective.
Yeah, and look, that's the thing with South Africa. I was chatting with a very senior Indian player very recently who is here at the World Cup, and he made a very valid point. He said, yes, T20 cricket is all about numbers, it's about stats and all that, but I, that those big moments, the how someone holds their nerve, there's no stats to support that, and that's where you need certain guys, whether they're experienced or not. Some guys just have it, and those guys in at the right moment, in the right moments, it is what wins matches for you in T20 cricket. And it made a lot of sense to me. I mean, yeah, of course, you're a numbers guy, Jared. I'm not so much of a numbers guy, but it is difficult to put that into context always, right? Like, who holds, like, do you pick guys who you back to hold their nerve when it matters? Which is why I still think Iftikhar Ahmed should have bowled that 20th over against India and not Mohammad Nawaz. He just, and purely because of, Iftikhar Ahmed has that air of he has nothing to lose in life for whatever he does in life, right? They make fun of him, he's the butt of all jokes in Pakistan, but he gets them over the line twice. I mean, the innings against India and the innings against South Africa, and some other crucial knocks he's played here and there as well. And how he bowled against Bangladesh when they gave him the ball. I think he bowled a very crucial middle over spell. And I think that's what's worked out for Pakistan, really. Like, so they have those 3 guys. They get criticized a lot. The other 3, Shan Masood, Rizwan, and Babar. But would Pakistan want to lose 3 early wickets and have, like, the Shadabs and the Nawazes and the Harises early in, or in early? Not really. It actually works out for Pakistan even if Babar and Rizwan take some time for them to bat the first 9-10 overs, and Shan Masood in that mix, like we saw against India as well. So they had enough to defend. They should have defended it. We've said this enough. It just took some Kohli magic and some, bizarre decisions from Babar towards the end that lost them that game. Similarly, against Zimbabwe, they should have chased it down quite comfortably. So we said this last week as well. They have everything going for them in terms of the players you need to do well in Australia to succeed in T20 cricket, especially with all these different conditions. And going into the semi-finals and the finals, Sydney and Adelaide, we've seen the pitches kind of slow down from what we saw in Perth and even in Melbourne. This balls are gripping, especially in Adelaide, but even in Sydney in the Sri Lanka England game, you could see the spinners come into the pitch, and also not just spinners, but guys like Naseem Shah who have these extreme changes of pace from 145 to 113. Those kind of guys are being very difficult to hit. Haris Rauf, another one who does that, and Shaheen Shah Afridi. There was criticism. They felt that he was rushed into that game against India. He wasn't fit enough. But just seeing him against Bangladesh, not just because he took 4 wickets, but just how he was up and about, he was throwing himself all around the field. He just seems to be hitting his stride as well. So that's what makes them so incredibly dangerous right now. And the inclusion of Mohammad Haris has just added that spunk in the middle order. The Rizwan looked good. He should have been taken early. Third ball, Nurul Hassan dropped him against Bangladesh, but he seemed to find that rhythm that he needed. He's been lacking that throughout this tournament. Babar struggled, got to 20, but well, it's okay. You expect him to come good at some point when
He
it
must be
matters. Maybe
due, right? I
he
mean,
has to be due.
as a numbers person, there is a certain point where you do look at someone like, remember when KL Rahul made what 5
Yeah.
runs in 6 innings or something, and everyone's going, drop him. I was like he's never done this before. So unless he's literally forgotten how to bat or he's carrying an injury we don't know about. And Bhuvi was another one. Bhuvi had that incredible run where he was terrible in the IPL, played for India for about 6 games where England couldn't hit him and he was quite handy against Sri Lanka. Came back to the IPL and was terrible again. Everyone's like, oh, Bhuvi's finished. I was like, well, that doesn't make any sense because we just saw him bowl some of the best spells of all time. And so people do jump to that. Look, we've flirted with it long enough. Let's get to South Africa. I mean, so I've done a big piece, big video that'll be out probably when our podcast is out about the history of South Africa in World Cups, and it's obviously bring your tissues, even if you're not a South African. I think at this point, right? Like I sent a message to a mate of mine who hates South Africa cricket, an Aussie guy. And I said, we can't even laugh at them anymore. And he said, you still can laugh at them. He goes, but it is getting harder. I remember it was the 2017 or 2013. Might have been 2017 World Cup press conference. Sorry, Champions Trophy press conference. And AB de Villiers was talking a lot about choking and everything else. There's been other press conferences what I've been to where someone has asked about that term and they've just dead batted it. There's been, they've gone and done camps on it. They've had psychologists involved, all this sort of stuff. I do think when you look back at all the choking, there's 2 things. A, they have always been very, very predictable teams, and I wonder if that doesn't sometimes, everyone, because they've been so good, it's very easy to scheme against them, right? So you go back to some of the, well, put it this way, they've got the highest win-loss percentage in limited overs cricket of all time. Right, so higher than Australia's, despite Australia's many trophies and South Africa's none. And you look at some of their teams, and quite often it's a similar thing. And I'm not saying that they're undynamic, but they play in a very sort of robotic way. So you could say maybe in World Cups, when if you look at the way that England had to win the 2019 World Cup, would South Africa have been able to change their game plan on the fly? In a way that India's been brilliant in this World Cup of literally looking at a pitch and looking at the ground and going, oh, okay, we're going to have to just tweak this a little bit. South Africa don't quite feel like that. And you just talked about it with the Dutch game. The Dutch knew exactly what they had to do against the Netherlands, against South Africa. Whereas I'm not sure South Africa knew exactly what they had to do against the Netherlands because the Netherlands were, and changing things around and trying new things. So there is all of that. But at a certain point is the weight of the inherited sadness now something that is beyond anything else, because I still look for cricket reasons, and when I look through all of their sadness, there's always something that they've done wrong. I know that's like when we look back on it. So when they were playing when they were playing Sri Lanka in 2003, right? And we go, they got the DL wrong. They needed 50 or 40 balls, and they had Klusner and Boucher at the crease. I can't remember if they were 6 wickets down or 7 wickets down. Yes, they were right on the DLS, but they were also, Boucher mishitting the ball to deep mid-wicket with them losing without us having to laugh at them, right? 1992, they were behind the rate as well. 2011 against New Zealand, they just let Nathan McCullum bowl 10 overs for 22 runs again. It's a part-time spinner. It's like,
exactly.
And you keep going through them, and you keep 2009 World Cup against Pakistan. They're just chipping the ball around Duminy and Callis, never getting on top of the game. But again, that could go back to this sort of, I don't know, fear But I'm not sure if it is that. I don't know. I can't work out if it's a cricket thing or a psychological thing, if that makes sense, or it's a history thing, or it's just really funny.
Like you know me, I'm always looking for cricketing reasons. I'm not a big believer in baggage, because you're talking about teams ranging over 30 years now, 92 to, there were a lot of players who played in this game against Netherlands, not a lot of, quite a few, who weren't even born then.
Yep. I have
So,
no idea about it, right?
yeah, exactly. So, I mean, can you inherit that kind of, is it fear or is it just apprehension? Or look, there are teams and players in all sport, if you look at it. I mean, I used to watch a lot of tennis growing up, and there were always these guys who would I mean, I don't know why I had to pick a South African, but I don't know whether you remember this guy called Wayne Ferreira, who would
Yeah.
get into a quarterfinal of literally every Grand Slam. But that was like the ceiling. That was it. He would
Yeah.
rarely maybe make one semi-final, but that's about it. He would
But
never.
Wayne Ferreira wasn't the number one ranked person coming into each tournament, right?
That is a good point. Yeah.
So
Amanda
the only person I
Coetzer,
can think,
another
hey,
Amanda Coetzer in the
yeah,
WTA.
but
She was
again,
again.
I mean, a big Amanda Kutzer fan. Don't get me wrong; we could talk about her
Yeah.
all day. But even if you look at Greg Norman, right? So Greg Norman, I
Mm,
think, is one of the few. So Greg Norman, I think, still has the second longest run at number one in the golf rankings,
yeah.
right? Only wins 2 majors, but he still won 2
He still
majors,
won. He still
right?
won.
And
Yeah.
he was
Yeah.
reckless. So he was the opposite of South Africa.
South Africa.
And
Yeah.
and you have a look. So some of these so many of those champions trophies, they were the favorites going in ahead of
Yeah.
Australia. They quite often were the world's one ranked side. I didn't go through all the rankings because I'm not as interested in that. I just looked at the record. 99 World Cup is phenomenal because that's the
Mm,
really, really interesting one. When you look at that team, they changed the way that people were bowling. So people
yeah.
stopped using their main bowler for the first over, and they started using them at first change. Lance Klusener basically changed the way we think about hitting, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
their record coming in, they were winning. I think they were winning 4 games for every loss, but from the '96 World Cup, which they also should have been better. They dropped Alan Donald for. They dropped
Yeah.
Alan Donald to play Paul Addo. It's important that you and I embrace this because this is who we are. I went
Yeah.
back and watched like an hour-long highlights package of that game, right? And when I'm looking at that game, so they drop Donald to bring in Paul Adams. Paul Adams bowls, I think he bowled 3 overs up front, and Brian Lara just carves him to death, right?
Yeah.
And they take Adams out of the attack. Lara makes 100. Lara goes out, and the only way they can bowl Adams is to bowl him at the death because they have to fit his overs in suddenly. Imagine, and for those who don't know about Alan Donald, from 1992 to 2002, he has the second lowest bowling average of anyone in world cricket, and they dropped him for a quarter final when they had to go up against Brian Lara, and they were massively favoured for that game as well. That was one of the bigger. I mean, it wasn't a close game, so it doesn't get
No.
remembered as a choke, but it's
Yeah,
phenomenal that
absolutely.
they didn't win that particular game. So you just keep going through all these things, and it's like it's absolutely mind-boggling how many times they were quite obviously the best team in one-day cricket. And I wonder how much I don't want to say Australia didn't take bilateral cricket seriously, but I always felt that Australia
No.
had a bit more of an atmosphere of we're going to try a few things, and then hopefully around the World Cup everything will come together. And you look at South Africa and I think they were like, well, this is working. So we're just going to keep doing this now until the next World Cup comes around. And then it doesn't work. So there's a different approach in the way that the two teams go about things, obviously. But it's just, they are so good at one-day cricket. And T20
Yeah.
cricket, there's only 2 teams that have a better than 50% win-loss ratio in World T20 history who haven't won. Right, and it's New Zealand and South Africa, and New Zealand have made a final, and South Africa haven't even made a final. I mean, they've made 2 semi-finals, and again, we got Daryl Brevis and Chris Morris and AB de Villiers and David Miller and Faf du Plessis, Tabrei Shamsi and Gigisa Rabada and Anrik Nortje, and you're just like, there's something not right here. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it doesn't. If this was, if say South Africa was a soccer club, these you would start hearing about these really world-class players. You speak about wanting to go to a club which would win titles, right? Like that's what it would be. And I think the Australia South Africa angle comparison is a good one. I almost feel like now, having lived here for a few years and having seen the sporting culture here, I think it's also the grand final phenomena with Australia. They speak about so many grand finals so often, and it's such a big deal, whether it's the NRL or the AFL, or, I mean, it's not called a grand final, but even the Melbourne Cup or whatever, it's all about winning the big prize. It's such a, like, it's so ingrained in the Australian sporting culture that there are no surprises that Australia know to win big titles more than, I mean, I'll be talking about that at a time when Australia been knocked out in a home World Cup, but that's a different story altogether. But they just have that drive to win big finals. I think it's just part of being an Australian sports person, in my opinion, even in other sport, Olympic hockey and all of that. But yeah, with South Africa, you're right. I mean, they just, it's almost like, just listening to you talk about how predictable they are. It's almost like taking down a bowler in T20 cricket who you can predict. Very predictable bowling action. You know where he's going to bowl, he or she is going to bowl it, like a very consistent bowler. So if you let them dominate, I'm sorry about the dog in the background. He agrees. Alfie agrees with me.
Yeah.
So if you let them play the kind of cricket they want to play, they'll dominate you, which is what happens in bilateral cricket. Once they get on top of you, they just stay on top. But I think in World Cup cricket, what happens is, because they come up against different teams, obviously like in any other World Cup, on a different day, like you put it perfectly, teams just find different ways to put South Africa in positions where they can't play the way they want to, in a strange way. And I think that's what seems to impact them. I guess that's the only thing I can pick on. Unless
Well,
they're
no. I mean, just to follow up on that is, and it's probably something we don't talk about enough, but you go back through 2003 World Cup for Australia, 99 World Cup, 2003, 2007. Yes, incredibly talented teams, but South Africa, maybe not quite always at the same level as Australia, but sometimes they were better and sometimes they were, roughly at that level. But the Australian teams, when you go back and you have a look at them, there's an element of problem solving that they have, right? And we don't talk about that enough in World Cups. But World Cups are, and I'm more and more I look at these, these World Cup tournaments. I think it's a lot about problem solving, because look at England. They turn up to this World Cup and they're like, great, we're going to smack everyone for 6. And then they get here and like straight away they're like, oh, okay, we're going to have to come up with something else, right? And I do think, and then you have from game to game, because you have all these different matchups. So a bilateral series, as you said, they spent a month preparing for this team. Bob Woolmer or whoever's in charge, Mickey Arthur says to the South African team, okay, cool, we know what to do here, and here. And they play for it. They're better than most teams and they get by. And then in the World Cup, it's like, oh, now you're playing the Netherlands, and now you're playing this team. Now you're on this pitch, and now this. And it just feels, and the only thing I would call back to that you said before is, you said some of these players aren't old enough to know 1992 and even 1999, I suppose, in some cases. The one thing I would say is, I don't think it's an escapable thing, even if you weren't old enough to live it. Like, there's a certain point that it's so prevalent in South African cricket culture, and it's either the thing you never speak of or the thing you constantly speak of, right? So I think there must be an element of all of that where there's no hiding from it. But look, the whole thing is absolutely fascinating. And as I said, if you want to follow it up on Thursday, I'll have the podcast out on Red Inca, and on tomorrow I'll probably have the video out, or very soon I'll have the video out where you can go through my take on the many different things that have happened to South African cricket at World Cups. And it's not good. Anyway, we'll have a break, and after the break, we'll talk a little bit about Mitchell Starc, and then you can talk about your favorite crowd catch.
If you love the language of cricket and want more, then head over to the 99.94 app, and you can hear all of our podcasts and cricket commentary. We're adding new shows all the time and covering cricket series from all over the world. Be the first to hear all of our announcements by following us on social media at 9994DM. Welcome to Cricket's Conversation.
Alex Malcolm's written a piece, which is really good. Well, I've only read half of it, but it's really good because it's exactly what I was going to write about Mitchell Starc. And I'll make a video about it very soon. But by the time I got around to it, South Africa had been kicked out of the World Cup, but I had other things that I needed to do. Plus, I'm very fascinated with Sam Curran, but that's for next week. Actually, it probably won't even be for next week. But so Mitchell Starc, the big question was, why isn't he in the side, right? And everyone's going on about it. And I was like, that's not the big question. The real question is, how come he was allowed to slide for so long and nothing was done about it, right? And it's all well and good to be like, we'll just throw him the ball and he'll come good. But it didn't happen in the last World Cup. And I didn't really see that much preparation given to him between times for him to get any better. Josh Hazlewood got good at T20 cricket on his own. I would argue that Pat Cummins maybe still hasn't got good at T20 cricket, but has certainly given it a red hot go playing on his own. And there's clearly a problem there. Now, part of the problem might be that Australia has 3 outstanding bowlers and whatever's left of James Pattinson. And Pattinson can't play any form of cricket without breaking down. And so they're left with 3 outstanding bowlers. And let's say they went with, I don't know, let's say they went with Boland for a whole series in Test cricket, or Richardson in T20 cricket, or Alice in T20 cricket or whatever. There's always going to be, if Australia loses, there's always going to be that nagging feeling of, we left him at. And you look at it, 2016 World Cup in India, they didn't have Starc, and that was seen as a big part of the reason they didn't do it. 2019 World Cup, they didn't have Hazlewood, right? That was their own choice, of course, but either way. It does feel that they're in this really weird situation where they want these guys to play in every game, and they feel really uncomfortable if they don't play in every game. But at the same time, you cannot do that anymore. And then, and they, you look at England. England made really clear distinctions, even against their bowlers' wishes, probably at certain times. And Jimmy Anderson's 48 and still bowling.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the way from everything or every source you hear in Australia, that's the way Australia seemed to be headed, on the direction in which they're headed with their fast bowlers. And look, think about it, Jared. Even last year, going into that World Cup, not many felt that they would go in with Cummins, Hazelwood, and Starc. It was almost a huge gamble that they took. Yes, Hazelwood was coming off a good IPL season. He'd won a title with Chennai Super Kings. But the other two, I mean, Cummins had not had a great IPL with the ball. He did a few sixes here and there. Mitchell Starc hadn't played a lot of T20 cricket. He did go on those tours to Bangladesh and West Indies, or at least one of them anyway. It was a gamble that paid off. Till that point on, Kane Richardson was arguably their number 1 T20 fast bowler. Right, he was playing every game, and he would have partners, different partners, whether it was Berendorf or whoever, like in the years or in the months leading up to that World Cup, Daniel Sams and all these guys. But eventually they said, I don't know whose call it was. They said, let's try our best attack and give it a red hot go, and it worked out well. But it wasn't the 3 seamers who won them the World Cup. Josh Hazelwood was great. Yes, Starc and Cummins were good in parts. But it was Zampa who really turned it around for them with the ball, and they batted really well. And like I said earlier, things just fell into place beautifully for them. Everything worked out, which happens with teams, right, in a different sport. But this time around, they give Mitchell Starc a different role, which I don't know whether he was comfortable doing, where they say, no, you can't be the new ball bowler. You have to bowl in the middle overs. There's a lot happening off the pitch with the new ball, so we'll get Hazelwood and Cummins in, and
also,
so you become the
he wasn't
middle.
swinging it, to be fair.
Exactly.
He's been working on that wall ball for a long time. He's finally getting close to perfecting it, and it has affected his swing. Hilariously, though, then what was it against Ireland? Suddenly he's swinging the ball everywhere in the 4th over, which confused everyone.
It did. And then suddenly, it was after that Ireland game that he spoke about. I remember I asked him in the press conference, like, how much has it changed your role, your approach? And he said, oh, I'm still the enforcer, but it has changed my lens. Like, I can no longer go looking for swing, because once you bowl in the 5th or 6th or even 7th over, you don't want to be like, letting batters get under the ball. And even at that speed. But that Ireland game, because Glenn Maxwell takes those 2 early wickets, bonus wickets, really. I mean, he didn't have to do anything. The Irish just threw the wickets away. It allows Starc to bowl at least 2 overs earlier than he was previously in the tournament. And he gets those 2 balls really to swing and, knocks them out, but then goes for a lot of runs later on. And Lachlan Tucker took him for a lot of runs. I think he eventually ended up with having conceded more than 40 runs. So it was a bizarre tournament for Mitchell Starc. And again, you're right. Like Alex Malcolm's written in his piece and others have mentioned, that between World Cups, he hasn't really played a lot of T20 cricket or consistently like a Hazelwood or a Cummins who have gone and played in the IPL. Look, it's a personal choice and we all respect it. Mitchell Starc wants to spend more time with his partner. And I mean, I would want to spend more time with my partner as well. So it makes all the sense in the world. But yeah, I mean, it means that he's not exposed to that humdrum of T20 cricket, playing a game once every 2-3 days against different opponents. We spoke about
Yeah,
South Africa earlier, but it's again.
Sorry, I was just going to add that the other thing that I think is interesting about it is that because the best way of putting this, I think they decided very late they were going to change his role. He opens the
Yes.
bowl. He opened the bowling against England in some of the warm ups. He opened the bowling against whoever they played before then. He then has one game against Sri Lanka in a warm up where he doesn't open the bowling. He then opens the bowling again for New Zealand in the first game of the World Cup, and then it's not there. So even if he had been playing lots of T20 cricket, they were giving him a new role on the edge of a World Cup, and it's classic Australia at World Cups. And we know that because they're so talented and they keep producing the players they do, they're going to win every now and again. But it's the big argument that I have had with many people with, sorry, not with them, but also on a lot of them have been on my side of, yeah, we're going to win a World Cup every now and again, but we're never going to win consistently because we don't plan really for these things. And then we get there and we have to hope that everything falls into place. And as we saw last time, Matthew Wade fell into place. Mitchell Marsh fell into place, and everything was great. And Hazelwood probably was the other one there. All three completely accidental, almost nothing to do with what anything Cricket Australia had ever done, right? And then you get to this World Cup, and it's a similar kind of thing. And then, at the end, throwing it to Cameron Green as well, as if to go, well, you're there to save you. So if you could, the whole thing just, and Kane Richardson as well, like, he hasn't bowled at all in this tournament. He then has to come out in the last game. It just, again, it just, to me, it's like they never really planned. That should be the lesson they should take out of this, despite the fact all the ex-players are like, Mitch Starc should play. You could argue that Mitch Starc shouldn't have been in the tournament. Like, I'm not sure they could carry Mitch Starc and Pat Cummins. And if you look at the pitches, I would say Kane Richardson would have, now looking back at the pictures, I should say, Kane Richardson was probably the better bowler for those conditions anyway. It's almost like some of those pictures have been like those shit heaps that the Renegades play on, right? Like, so, I find all that very, very interesting. That is not the lesson that will be taken. The lesson is that we should just back the most talented players, despite the fact that he's been going at 10.7 runs and over at the death and has been getting hammered and they don't give him the new ball anymore.
And T20 cricket has changed, right? It's you see other teams as well. They are more than happy to drop their best players, depending not just on matchups and all that, but on how they've gone. And look, we're talking about Mitchell Starc when he was left out. I mean, he was left out of that last game. He was not injured. Dan Vittori came and said it was a matchup thing, and it was a strategic ploy to play Kane Richardson. And look, he could have taken 2 wickets out of his first three balls. And who knows, right? He could have had a great day rather than I wouldn't say a forgettable night, but yeah, he didn't look at his best at all. Despite this old lady shouting out that he was her favorite bowler as he ran off from the nets. I think a South Australian who didn't realize that he's moved states. I would like to believe, but it's again, I keep saying the same thing. Things just whatever Australia tried worked out in 2021. In 2022, whether it was Tim David or even in the last game, Kane Richardson, Cam Green, Steve Smith being brought back into the side for that game where you wanted to win big because of an injury to David. Yes, that didn't work out. Matthew Wade didn't face enough deliveries as it turned out. The Australia-England game getting washed out. I mean, you can look back at this campaign, like Glenn Maxwell said, and say, oh, we lost only one game. But I think it goes deeper than that. I think Australia almost look like those soccer teams or football teams. They'll win a World Cup like France in 2002, where they carried the same team from literally the same team from 4 years ago, and suddenly you realize that the other teams had moved on in a way, right? Like, and you were just carrying a few players who maybe you just carried for one too many World Cups. And that's what it felt like, even
I,
though
see, I
Australia
don't
just
think it's
lost one
that.
game.
So I think it was as clear as things went their way last time, and instead of them
Mm,
going, "Oh, we got a bit lucky here," they did what Australia does, and they went,
yeah.
"Hey, we're still great. We just won a World Cup, and we weren't even really trying correctly, right?" And
True, true.
I have no problem with that. So here's a story from when I worked with the Melbourne Stars. So I think we came last the year before I worked with them, right? And we made the final the year I was there. And it was the year that the Renegades got over the line when the Stars should have beaten them and they collapsed. So we literally went with about 9 overs of winning the Big Bash after coming last the year before, right? And they were cock a hoot. Oh, look how great we are. And I was like, yeah, we only made the finals because Brisbane Heat forfeited points during
Yeah.
the year because I think their lights hadn't worked at a game or something like that. There was like some random situation. I said, we're a 50-50 team and we did well in the last 2 games. I said, but if you're sitting there thinking that this is a good team and you only need to make minor tweaks, that is not the situation. Actually, there's a few obvious flaws that we have to fix here. And they were like, anyway, Jarrod, it's been great having you. And we're going to move on. And that's what happens with success. I think in a lot
Mm,
of cases, that's why when you do lose, you actually have the ability to shape things a little bit better. And I
yeah.
think that it would be hard to. I saw that Pat Cummins did a video with Adam Gilchrist where they watched the final, and I was sitting there going,
Mm.
and I only saw this like a week ago, but I was sitting there watching it going, oh, so they didn't really learn anything from that. And why would you? You won a World Cup. Everyone else can, suck a fuck. You've got a crowd catch that you thought was that is worthy of. Which game was this? Was this the Bangladesh Pakistan game?
No, no, it was. I mean, look, two moments stood out for me from that South Africa Netherlands game.
I
I mean,
was
there
in
was
that
so
game.
many wonderful moments. Yeah, the Van der Merwe catch and all that. But before we get to the crowd catch, another moment which really summed up South Africa for me was Keshav Maharaj. I mean, I felt so bad for him. It was painful to watch him hop from one end to the other. And he completed a couple, like twos at least on 3 occasions while hopping on one leg. Almost felt like he was playing hopscotch, whatever it's called in your
Who
part of the
who
world.
did the best? Who did
Um,
the best injured running in this tournament though? Him or Roloff against Sri Lanka, where Roloff looked like he was actually giving birth.
I think because his roll off, he wins because of just being the Ian Harvey of our generation. I like to call him the freak cricketer. But Maharaj was just looked painful, and at one point, the ball goes to mid on, and they're attempting a second run, but then Maharaj has to like hop back to his to the bowling end, and Logan Van Beek just does not throw the ball. I mean, he felt sorry for them, and at that point, you felt sorry for South Africa. Like, imagine a point in a World Cup where a Netherlands team is feeling sorry for a South African team. A lot of them were South African. Don't forget, they were born in South Africa. At least 4 who played in that playing 11 have played first class cricket or domestic cricket in South Africa. But that moment was like the awe moment. But the yay moment of the day, maybe we should have this as a segment for every week, Jared. The yay and the awe. But the greatest catch I've ever seen taken outside the boundary rope came from the steward. So I think it's in the last over where Ackerman hit those 2 sixes. The first of them goes just a little over the dugout where the
Mm.
dugouts are at the Adelaide Oval, and this guy, the steward, has a phone in his right hand, and he stretches his left arm as much as he can. A stocky guy, and just very matter of factly, like you would pick an apple from a tree, he just plucks it and chucks it back and makes sure his phone is intact. And it almost like that's what he does for a living, right? Like he just goes around catching cricket balls which are very very which should not be caught. And funnily enough, the second six that Colin Ackerman hit also went in the same
Mm.
direction, but this time they just fell it just fell a little short of him, and this time I think it stuck his phone into his pocket. He had both hands. And yeah, if he had taken it, it wouldn't have been spectacular enough. So in a way, it's good that he didn't, and we were left with one of the greatest catches ever seen at the Adelaide Oval, but not on the field, but off the field.
I've got a feeling, and I don't think it's the same person, but I've got a feeling there was a security guard at Adelaide Oval in maybe 2018 or 2019 Actually, it might have even been 2017, who took a spectacular catch as well. I think he was facing the crowd or something and turned around and took a catch. So all I'm saying is they might have the greatest fielding security staff in world cricket. Bharat, are you working on anything that you want to plug, or anything that's coming out soon?
I wrote a really. I know it was in between our two shows. I wrote one of my favorite pieces of the World Cup on what Rashid Khan means to Afghanistan, the Afghans who live in Adelaide. And I had a lot of fun with it because it's a fascinating story. It's not just about cricket. It's about one of them is a former ADF interpreter who worked 9.5 years for the Australian military in the war zone in Afghanistan, then moves here in 2016 looking for a new identity. 2 years later or so, Rashid Khan moves to Adelaide Strikers, and suddenly they have that identity. There's a long connection between Adelaide and the Afghan Cameliers
Mm.
going back 200 years or 150 years. So they felt like the Rashid Khan kind of brought it back to them. And there's a kidnapping story there. The poor guy spoke to Samandar. He was nearly kidnapped. He was kidnapped, almost lost his life, escaped, and he still plays. So they play an ADF interpreters versus ADF veterans match, where like every Afghan representative team in Adelaide, they want to wear the blue, not the Afghan blue, but the strikers blue. So every time they play cricket, they want to be Rashid Khan, but poor Samandar cannot bowl like Rashid Khan. He bowls like Malinga because of how he hurt his shoulder while escaping from three guys trying to kill him. So it's quite the story. So I know it's a replug, but I want to talk about that story. And now we are into the last week. I'm going to stay back for the Adelaide semi-final, India-England. So that's going to be a good one. And then into the final. So I'm not. I want some help from you on an Alex Hales story, but we'll talk about it off air.
Yeah, I will only talk about Alex Hales off here, but I'm more than happy to help. Great, mate. Well, it was good talking to you again, and I suppose next time, shall we talk about the final that we will have just have witnessed?
We will indeed.
All right, I'll see you then. Thanks, mate.